I want to thank Councilmember Ann Kitchen for coming out to talk with us about affordable housing. Thank you so much. And I'll hand the microphone over to you for you to just kind of give us a quick introduction to what you're thinking about lately.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here today. I really appreciate the chance to come and talk with you. I've been honored to represent District 5 for, I guess, 3.5 years now. And I look forward to continuing to represent District 5. I want to just highlight 3 things that are my focus coming forward. 3 things on top of a lot of other things that we work on, but they're all interconnected. So I'll talk specifically about housing today. So I look forward to our opportunity to delve into housing and affordable housing available for the whole spectrum of folks in the community is important. Transportation is something I focus on also. Transportation is key connection to housing and housing affordability. So we have to look at those 2 things together. Healthcare is another thing that's really critical for our community, and I see all these things interacting.
Great, thank you. I wanted to start off with a question about the Strategic Housing Blueprint, which I know that you were one of the sponsors or the sponsor for the implementation plan for the blueprint to make sure that we're really able to take action on the goals in the blueprint. And in your response to our questionnaire, a lot of the key actions that you highlighted were about funding and making sure there are enough funding mechanisms and enough money in those buckets to be able to do the things that we set out as goals in the blueprint. So I was wondering if you could talk about specific funding mechanisms that you're looking at and what we might expect for you to be pushing forward in the next 4 years.
Thank you. And yes, let me just reiterate, that the Strategic Housing Blueprint, this is the first ever holistic plan that we've had as a city, which I think is so critical because otherwise we won't remain focused on what's the most effective things that we can be doing and actually make sure that we hit the target. I'm a big component of planning and not planning that delays things, but planning that makes sure that we hit the target. Because we have a great deal of needs and limited funding, and we need to be effective because dollars don't do everything. We can throw a lot of money at things, and if we aren't doing the right things, then we won't be effective. So, with that said, the housing bond is critical. It's a $250 million housing bond, and it's going to cover a range of things, all the way from land acquisition to rental property, home ownership, home repair, and those are really important for us. So I just can't emphasize enough how much that bond proposal is for us. I also want to highlight the funding that we have for homelessness. We are experiencing as a community issues related to homelessness all over the city, not just downtown. In District 5, we're working with neighborhoods in the Manchac, Benwhite area, in the South Park Meadow area, in the area around the Slaughter Overpass. I know that this is an issue throughout the city, and it's a very complex problem. It is a problem of connecting people to resources, and there's a lot of complications to that. It's also a safety issue for neighborhoods, and there's a lot of issues to that. So I consider what's happening with our community with regard to homelessness to be a public health crisis, and one that we need to both put the funding towards and also to learn how we can be most effective with that funding.
Thank you.
I don't know what time I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, we're just gonna chat. And you guys can jump in whenever you want. I still have a few questions, but if any questions really strike you, walk up to that microphone and we can kind of get the conversation going. So my next question is also about the blueprint. A lot of the items in the blueprint implementation plan look a lot at the land development code reform. And a lot of the goals we set out in the blueprint are reliant on some pretty, good changes to land development code. And I was wondering if you might be able to talk about the key actions that you see need to happen for a new land development code, and what any potential delay in taking those actions would cause in our affordable housing crisis right now.
Well, let me say first that I am against Prop J because of the timeline. It could be up to a 3-year delay before we could take action, and we have too many problems, and they're too urgent problems to wait. And those problems include housing, but they also include a whole range of things relating to our environment, our parks, our traffic, all those kinds of things. So with regard to what our next steps are, I think it was the right thing to do to hit pause. I call it a reboot, because we were in an environment that was just not working in terms of our communications and engagement with the public. So I expect the city manager to come back with a proposal for a new approach, one that is focused on transparency and community engagement. I expect that in the first of the year. And then I expect that the council will consider those recommendations and then begin the steps to move forward. So a number of things that I think that are really important that I'll just kick on. With regard to housing, the density bonus program, we've started some steps to recalibrate that. We need to do that. We need to take action on a greater variety of housing types in more areas of the city. We need to think about our ADUs and smaller homes and what we can do to incent that, as opposed to just tearing down homes and building huge homes in their place. We need to have permitting improvements. The process takes too long, it's too expensive. And we need to fix that. That's fundamental to housing. We also need to remember infrastructure needs, because the problems that we have with traffic and with flooding in our community have to be addressed, and they're important to housing also. So there's some fundamental changes that we need to make to our land development code related to those issues also.
I have another question sort of building on this land development code topic. This is kind of what I do all day, so I'm very interested in it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit. So you say that you have some experience working with neighborhoods in your district on homelessness. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you plan on working with neighborhoods on new land development code changes, and how you might be sort of balancing the desire to preserve a lot of our existing neighborhood character, but also provide for more housing opportunities in more parts of the city.
Well, a couple things. First off, I think that there is a great deal of agreement, and when I talk to neighborhoods, I'm hearing agreement. That what we want is we want communities where people can live and work and play in a way that that they have an environment that they can do that, and sort of that complete communities concept. And everyone is pretty much saying the same thing. So what does that mean in terms of how we have more housing while understanding and preserving neighborhood character? Well, first off, I think we recognize the importance of building along corridors. And that's important for a number of reasons, because it works well with transit and the kinds of traffic improvements that we need. So I think we need to understand how we can focus additional housing opportunities along corridors, and what we need to do with the land development code to make that more possible. And then we need to understand what we can do in neighborhoods, like we did a number of years ago with regard to ADUs, and what we can continue to do to make ADUs more possible for people. I think that people in neighborhoods would like the opportunity to have options for someone in their family to move in, or in some cases options to rent some properties, because those options help people stay in their homes in their neighborhoods. And also, I have heard from neighborhoods that I deal with the concern about the McMansions. And again, it's not that people do not have the ability or the right to build big homes, But when we see neighborhoods turning over, so that the character of and the size of homes in a neighborhood, that we're losing all that, then we lose some affordability. So working with neighborhoods on how we can help people stay in their neighborhoods, whether that's, building an ADU or other kinds of things that help incent preserving the homes that are there, instead of just making it easier to just tear down a home and build a really large home. Those kinds of things help us with our neighborhoods. The other thing is too, the goals in the goals in the strategic blueprint related to affordable housing all over the city are really important. I was really excited to be able to be at a redevelopment of the Pathways to Goodrich, which is in Zilker neighborhood, which is going to go up to 100, I think it's 120 units, right there near downtown and right next to Lamar and transportation. The Zilker neighborhood embraced that property, worked very closely with HACA to design it and think about the impacts on the neighborhood from a traffic standpoint. And so it's a shining example of a affordable housing opportunity very close to town in the middle of a neighborhood.
That's great. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? No? Okay, I'm gonna have just one last question and then we'll take a short break and go to District 8 candidates. You've talked a little bit about the corridors and how that's a really important place for us to get more housing because we can co-locate all the other amenities you need for complete community. A lot of the corridors that we're looking at lately with the blueprint implementation plan and the bond funds, there are some properties along those corridors that are at risk of being redeveloped and those residents being moved somewhere else. So I wonder, I guess this is sort of a twofold question of how might we be able to better preserve the existing affordable units that we have, even if they're not technically income restricted, they're naturally occurring affordable housing. And in cases where that redevelopment is just going to happen, how do we make sure that people who are being displaced from those units have real options in being able to move somewhere else and being able to plan for that move in their life?
Well, the last part first, there's a lot that we can do with regard to displacement, and I'll just highlight one of those things, and that is the council relatively recently, I think, passed relocation assistance requirements, which relate to notification to residents and financial assistance and those kinds of things, so that tenants have some rights related to assistance to help them if they have to be relocated. But I think the first thing is that we should do everything we can to preserve existing units so that we preserve that affordability. Because, well, as you said, when we end up tearing down housing, it inevitably becomes more expensive. So there's a range of things that we can do for that. And again, that gets back to funding. I think that the housing bond, again, gives us additional opportunities to support preserving that kind of housing. Also can help us get ahead of the game in terms of land acquisition and things like that. So I think that preservation is an essential component of what we're doing for housing.
Thank you. Are there any last words you'd like to share with everyone, or?
Well, I would just like to say that housing affordability is obviously a key issue for us. And when I use that term, I'm going all the way from income restricted to people at middle income people who have and to people, retirees that have difficulty staying in their homes. So we have to look at all the tools that are available to us and use all the tools that are available to us. So this is a city where people at all income levels can continue to live. So I think that's important. And then the only other second thing I would focus on is, as I mentioned before, the what I consider to be a crisis that we're experiencing with regard to homelessness is something that as a community we need to come together and address. It's not okay for people to be experiencing homelessness in our city. And it is something that we need to come together as a community to address.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to take a 2-minute break while I trade out these signs, and then we'll be right back. I'm sorry, I promised Councilmember Garza, and myself for that matter, to highlight Proposition E. So I'm going to leave some of these here. This is a proposition for a neighborhood center in the Dove Springs area. It's really a critical need. So I'm going to leave some of this information That's
here.
great. Yeah, that's where I said. Thank you.